Order.
Resumption of debate on the carbon pricing bill.
Minister Masagos.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank members for their support and comments on the carbon pricing bill. Last week, the Business Times published an article entitled "A Powerful, Effective Strategy to Combat Climate Change," which featured the views of top executives of companies and professional associations on the carbon tax. I was heartened by their strong support for the carbon tax. Many executives recognize that pursuing environmental sustainability and economic growth are not a matter for trade-offs, but a strategy to stay competitive. They can do good and do well at the same time. Mr. Paul Hannigan, Vice President from Dell DMC, noted, and I quote, "Industries need to look beyond the perceived economic loss from taxation and recognize that it ultimately contributes to the long-term prosperity of companies," unquote. Mr. Damien Delemis, Country President of Schneider Electric Singapore, said, and I quote, "Going green can in fact lead to greater economic growth in the longer term. We strongly believe that sustainability is the end game of any company in today's world," unquote. This is why we are introducing the carbon tax, as our companies are nudged towards more carbon efficient and greener practices. They will strengthen their competitive edge and thrive in a low-carbon global future. Let me address members' questions on the carbon tax framework. Engineer Dr. Lee Biwa asked whether our proposed carbon tax rate of $5 per ton of greenhouse gas or GHG emissions will affect our ability to meet our goals. I would like to assure the House that the carbon tax rate of $5 per ton of GHG emissions was decided very carefully, taking into account both economic competitiveness and environmental considerations. To Assistant Professor Madhav Mohan's query, the carbon tax should not be viewed in isolation. It works in tandem with the comprehensive mitigation measures that we have developed to reduce emissions and meet our obligations under the Paris Agreement. This package has been carefully designed, taking into consideration our international competitiveness as well as our pledge, and will be reviewed regularly. Our initial carbon tax level of $5 per ton cannot be directly compared with that of other jurisdictions. While they may have a higher headline carbon prices, they often give significant exemptions to particular sectors and companies. These effectively pay a lower carbon price than the published rate. Rather than imposing different tax levels on different sectors and companies, we have opted for a simple and transparent carbon tax with no exemptions. This maintains a fair and consistent price signal to incentivize emission reduction across the entire economy. I also want to assure the House that we are mindful of our international competitiveness when introducing this tax, given that we are an export-oriented economy, as highlighted by Mr. Henry Quek and Ms. K. Tanalachimi. Together with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the Economic Development Board, and the National Climate Change Secretariat, my ministry and NEA have consulted companies extensively over the past year on the design of our carbon tax framework. While companies understood the need to price carbon, they asked for a transition period to adjust to the impact of a tax. This is why we are starting with $5 for the first 5 years. Companies will have time to adjust, for example, by upgrading to more energy-efficient equipment. In response to Mr. Gan Thiampo, the Minister of Finance has said that we will, in fact, review the carbon tax rate by 2023. We intend to increase the level to $10 to $15 per ton of GHG emissions by 2030. Our review will take into account international climate change developments, our progress towards our climate pledge, and our economic competitiveness. As highlighted by Mr. Quek and Ms. Rahayu Mahzam, we are mindful of the need to manage compliance costs, which was also a key feedback from companies. We have done the following. Firstly, we have built on existing measurement, reporting and verification, or MRV, requirements that were set out in the Energy Conservation Act, or ECA, which companies are already familiar with. These requirements take reference from international standards like ISO and GHG protocols, which are used by many companies for corporate sustainability reporting. This approach streamlines requirements and aligns with international practices. Second, we have identified a list of excluded emissions so that companies need not incur disproportionately high costs to measure and report these small emissions sources. Third, NEA is actively growing the pool of third-party verifiers in Singapore to ensure that companies can access competitive offerings. NEA has been organizing briefings to familiarize companies with the new MRV requirements and carbon tax obligations, and will continue to help companies build up their capability. The detailed MRV requirements will be made publicly available. Ms. Rahayu also asked if there's a plan to move towards an emissions trading scheme, or ETS, in the future. For a small domestic market like Singapore, a carbon tax could achieve the same objective as an ETS in a simpler way. It provides greater price certainty and stability. Nonetheless, we recognize that there may be benefits in linking our markets with other jurisdictions in the longer term. It's a complex endeavor, as Ms. Rahayu has pointed out, and we are still studying the feasibility. We will need to build up key capabilities both in governments and companies. We therefore decided to introduce the fixed price, credit-based, or FPCB system, as this will put in place the key building blocks should we decide to link our market to other jurisdictions in the longer term. We'll continue to monitor international developments and consult companies. Mr. Louis Ng asked about the FPCB mechanism. Companies can buy credits from NEA at a fixed price throughout the year, but must surrender credits equivalent to the preceding year's tax liability by 30th September. There's no expiry date on the credits in this initial phase. Nevertheless, companies have told us that they are likely to buy the required credits only after they receive the notice for tax assessments, so as not to tie up their liquidity. Hence, the scenario whereby companies operate their plants in a less efficient manner in order to, as Mr. Luis has stated, use up unused credit is highly unlikely. Engineer Dr. Lee and Mr. Leon Pereira also asked if the government will share the data from the emissions report. And Ms. Tanalachimi asked about the measures we have to ensure data security. As the emissions report contains commercially sensitive information, they will not be shared publicly. We have strict provisions in the bill to ensure the confidentiality and security of the data reported. That said, I note that the members are concerned about tracking the effectiveness of our policies in lowering our energy consumption and efficiency and emissions. I would like to clarify that we already track and publish the improvements in energy consumption per dollar GDP from 2005 levels in the budget book. We also regularly report our emissions to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, and will continue to do so. And these are all publicly available. Engineer Dr. Lee and Mr. Quek spoke about the impact of the carbon tax on households. This is expected to be small, at about 1% of total electricity and gas expenses on average. As the Minister for Finance announced at Budget 2018, eligible HDB households will receive additional use-safe rebates of $20 per year from 2019 to 2021. On average, the additional use-safe rebates will cover the expected increase in electricity and gas expenses arising from the carbon tax. This will help HDB households to to adjust to the carbon tax as they reduce their utilities consumption over time. We will assess the impact of the carbon tax at a later stage and review the need to extend these rebates. More importantly, we want to encourage energy-saving habits among households on a sustained basis. We are working with the community on the lamp replacement program to assist 1- and 2-room HDB households to replace their lamps with more energy-efficient LED ones. NEA will also be organizing an energy savings challenge this year to raise awareness on energy conservation. I would like to assure Ms. Tanalachmi and Ms. Rahayu that government agencies will work closely with the Consumer Association of Singapore case and Competition Commission of Singapore to monitor the market for unfair pricing and coordinated price hikes, which are anti-competitive. Case will look into feedback of any alleged profiteering. As members have highlighted, a key reason for the carbon tax is to encourage our companies to transform and ready themselves for a low-carbon economy. To achieve this, I agree with Dr. Lee, Engineer Dr. Lee, that we must be more ambitious and bolder in improving energy efficiency, or EE. Many developed countries are achieving an EE improvement rate of 1% to 2% per year. We must do just as well. The industrial sector, which accounts for about 60% of Singapore's GHG emissions, has been a key focus of our efforts. Last year, we amended the ECA to enhance the frameworks and tools to support companies' EE improvements. Our new requirement is for new industrial facilities and major expansion projects to undergo reviews at the design phase to identify and incorporate EE opportunities at the start of the project, thereby avoiding more expensive retrofitting and operational disruption later on. This year, we are moving the carbon pricing bill to provide the added motivation, the motor fuel, if you like, to spur companies to actively pursue emissions reduction. The government has been providing support to continue to improve EE, and many have forged ahead. Let me just share 2 stories. Global Foundries, a semiconductor company, has been innovating and investing in new technologies to improve EE and reduce emissions. For example, it redesigned the combustion chamber in its thermal abatement units and reduced its liquefied petroleum gas consumption by 31%. This resulted in annual cost savings of about $260,000 and an annual carbon abatement of about 640 tons. With further support from the government, Global Foundries is working to replace a process chamber cleaning gas that has high global warming potential with one that has no global warming potential. This will reduce the emissions significantly by more than 400,000 tons when completed in 2019. Another role model is Chevron Oronite Private Limited, which has consistently achieved EE improvement rates above the industry average. To improve EE, it installed a boiler system to recover waste heat from its thermal oxidizer for steam generation. It also installed a mechanical vapor recompression system to lower the energy use of its new manufacturing unit. These projects have resulted in energy savings of $1.8 million and carbon abatement of 4,800 tons each year. Members have asked what the government is doing to support companies in the transition to a low-carbon future. Government is prepared to spend more than the estimated $1 billion in carbon tax revenue that will be collected in the first 5 years on worthwhile carbon abatement projects. Existing EE incentive schemes such as the Productive Grant for Energy Efficiency, or PGEE, and the Energy Efficiency Fund, E2F, will be enhanced. The enhanced support will also be extended to SMEs to encourage them to improve their EE, including basic measures such as upgrading to more efficient lighting. And more support will go to projects that achieve greater emissions abatement beyond basic enhancements. Mr. Pereira has asked whether part of the revenue from the carbon tax will be used to provide loans to companies. The EDB has been piloting an EE financing program whereby companies that are not able to afford the upfront costs of EE projects can apply for loans through a third-party financier. The potential benefits of such a program are that industrial facilities will not have to pay for the upfront cost of these projects, but can still enjoy part of the energy savings. Part of the risk is transferred to the third-party financier. Both beyond financial support, the government will also grow the wider industrial EE ecosystem in Singapore to develop greater expertise in the energy services sector. Initiatives include engaging institutes of higher learning to train and upskill energy services professionals and working with professional bodies, such as the Institution of Engineers Singapore, to develop Chartered Engineer certification for EE professionals. At the same time, NEE officers have been and will continue to engage the companies to help them to identify areas for EE improvements. Besides driving energy efficiency improvement, the carbon tax will help spur investment in and take up of low-carbon solutions. Ms. Dhanalakshmi asked if the government can provide incentives for companies to adopt renewable energy sources. The government's policy is to ensure that energy, regardless of source of generation, is correctly priced to fully reflect the cost of generation and let the market work out the equilibrium. Instead of providing subsidies, what we have done is to invest in the research and development of renewable clean energy technologies. We set up the Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, SERIS in short, in 2008 to conduct R&D on solar technologies. One of its projects is a collaboration with the REC Group to develop high-performance solar cells, which I understand is among the world's highest performing solar cells. We are also studying deployment of solar panels beyond our rooftop onto our water bodies. In 2016, PUB launched the largest test bed at Tengah Reservoir. Addressing intermittency issues and ensuring grid stability are important as we increase solar deployment. The Energy Market Authority and Singapore Power launched the Energy Storage System Test Bed in 2016 to better understand the feasibility of deploying grid-level energy storage technologies locally. Last October, EMA also awarded a $6.2 million research grant to develop our solar forecasting capabilities. I assure Mr. Louis Ng that the government will continue to support and invest in such R&D efforts. Engineer Dr. Lee asked about the impact to the refining sector in Singapore. In my interactions with refinery companies, I've been impressed by their bold and transformational moves. Since 2000, ExxonMobil has spent about $8 billion to develop low-carbon technologies and are a global leader in carbon capture and storage technology. In Singapore, I officiated the opening of the third cogeneration plant, which improved the refinery's energy efficiency by 4 to 5% and reduces their carbon emission by 265,000 tons. Similarly, Shell has been reaching into the next energy frontier with renewables and hydrogen. They intend to increase their spending in their new energies business arm to about $1 to $2 billion per year until 2020. These oil giants are showing us the way by taking destiny in their own hands and transforming earlier rather than later to stay competitive and maintain the lead in the low-carbon global economy. Mr. Pereira asked whether we regularly measure our climate change resilience. We do. To ensure that Singapore is well prepared for climate change, we have set up an interagency resilience working group that's responsible for studying and monitoring Singapore's vulnerabilities to the effects of climate change, such as sea level rise, and developing appropriate response measures. Our climate scientists are also plugged into relevant global scientific forums that develop climate change projections. Our adaptation measures are reviewed whenever there are new findings. Lastly, Assistant Professor Madev also asked about our position in the development of the Paris Rulebook, given the position taken by the EU and China. As one would expect in a multilateral framework, negotiations are complex. Publicized positions may be transitional and do not reflect landing points. Singapore participates actively in these negotiations to get countries to focus on a fair and consistent implementation of their nationally determined contribution, what they commit to reduce and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. At the end of the day, for the Paris Agreement to work, all countries must meet their commitments that they have committed. We will continue to participate actively to this end. Indeed, Singapore's active involvement in previous rounds had been impactful. Singapore was the advocate for the very concept of the NDC and worked with other like-minded countries to get it adopted by UNFCCC under the Paris Agreement. We must continue to be active and impactful because climate change is an existential issue for Singapore. Mr. Speaker, let me conclude. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me conclude. The carbon tax has been deliberated carefully and extensively within the government. We've also made a concerted effort to consult and engage the industry. The bill is an important step forward, not only in encouraging industry to do their part for the climate, but also in raiding our economy and strengthening our competitiveness as the world transitions to a low-carbon economy. Companies ignore these realities at their peril. Therefore, I call on members of the House to give their support to this bill. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Carbon Pricing Bill.
Committee stage what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill.
The question is that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 to 80 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the 1st to the 5th schedules stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported. Minister Masagos.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to report that the bill has been considered in committee and agreed to without amendment.
Third reading what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Carbon Pricing Bill.